It was New Year's Eve, and I was tasked with taking my younger cousin to our grandparents' house. We lived in neighboring houses, and both he and I stayed behind while our parents and uncles left earlier to help prepare dinner. I had some work to finish, and he had a friend's birthday party to attend. The plan was simple. I'd finish my work, pick him up from the party, and we'd head to our grandparents' house, which was about an hour and 45 minutes away. For context, there's a 23-year age gap between me and my cousin. At the time this happened, he was 6, and I was about to turn 30. Right on the dot at 7 p.m., I pulled up in front of the house where my cousin was. Even though he wasn't thrilled about leaving the party, he came along without much fuss, probably because I had candy ready to avoid any tantrums. Despite our age difference, we've always been close. Since I worked remotely, I often watched him, so he felt more like a little brother or even a son to me. He was a smart and lovable kid, easily entertained, which made me hopeful our trip would be uneventful. Snow was falling lightly as we started our journey. I wasn't a fan of driving in snow, but it wasn't anything I couldn't handle. Inside the car, the atmosphere was cozy, the heater was on, snowflakes were dancing outside the window, and my cousin was happily watching Christmas cartoons on his tablet. As he laughed and sang along to the songs, I felt nostalgic, thinking back to how magical Christmases were with my family when I was his age. As night fell, the snow began to pick up. I stayed focused on the road, which was deserted and lined with dense forest. I'd driven this route many times, but the emptiness of the area never failed to unsettle me. That's when I noticed a pickup truck in the distance behind us. At first, I didn't think much of it. If anything, it was comforting to know we weren't completely alone on the road. About 10 minutes later, my cousin announced he needed to use the bathroom. I told him we'd be at our grandparents' house in 45 minutes, but being a kid, he couldn't wait. Reluctantly, I pulled over and stepped out with him. He insisted on going behind a tree like his dad did. I wanted him to go next to the car, but I gave in to avoid an argument. We were only a few steps from the tree when I saw the pickup truck drive past us. The two men inside stared at us longer than normal, their eyes locked on us. A chill ran down my spine, but I brushed it off, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild. As we headed back to the car, I heard footsteps crunching in the snow. The dark and the snowfall made it hard to see, but I squinted in the direction of the sound. That's when I saw the two men walking toward us. One of them shouted something to the other, but I didn't stick around to hear more. I grabbed my cousin, lifting him into my arms, and ran as fast as I could toward the car. One of the men started running after us, while the other turned back toward the truck. Panic surged through me as I realized we might not reach the car in time. In desperation, I scooped up a handful of snow and threw it at the man closest to us, hitting him square in the face. That gave me just enough time to unlock the car, get in, and lock the doors. By the time the man cleared the snow from his eyes, he was pulling on the driver's door handle, but I'd already locked it and started the engine. When I looked up, I saw the pickup speeding toward us. Adrenaline kicked in. I swerved hard to avoid them, and they skidded on the snow, losing precious seconds. I floored the gas pedal, trying to put as much distance as possible between us. I drove in a frenzy, terrified of losing control of the car on the icy road. My cousin stayed oddly calm, which scared me even more. Either he didn't understand what was happening, or he was in shock. Relief only washed over me when I saw the sign marking the entrance to town. I thought about heading straight to my grandparents' house, but I knew that wouldn't be safe. I wasn't naive about situations like this. Instead, I drove directly to the police station. I told the officers what happened, giving them a detailed description of the men, their truck, and the license plate. My family arrived soon after, visibly shaken by what could have happened. My cousin, as I feared, was caught between not fully understanding and being scared enough to cling to me. He only started crying when he saw his mom. I felt a mix of relief and gratitude that he'd stayed calm during the ordeal, something rare for a kid his age. Later, the police confirmed that the truck's license plate belonged to a vehicle reported stolen 2 days earlier. I never found out what those men intended to do, but the fact that one chased us while the other tried to block us with the truck and that the plate was stolen made it clear their intentions weren't good. Even now, in moments when I question my instincts, I remind myself that it's always better to be safe than sorry. If I hadn't acted quickly, things could have ended very differently. Hey, Horror Spectator here. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on post notifications so you're always in the loop when new videos drop. We post 2 videos every week. If you're really into this content, consider sharing it with your friends. It really helps us grow this community. Now, let's move on to the second story. It was New Year's Eve, and I was forced to fly home to be with my family. I was in my final year of college and had been dating Angela for about 8 months when everything happened. I had argued with my family about this night. I wanted to spend it with Angela, but my family thought that was unacceptable and insisted I be with them. They argued that I'd already skipped Christmas with them, and they wouldn't tolerate me missing New Year's Eve too. Since I'm not one to stir up trouble or enjoy confrontations, we eventually reached a compromise. I'd spend New Year's Eve day with Angela, and then catch a flight home that would get me there before midnight. It seemed like a simple plan, but the bad weather had other ideas. A snowstorm swept across the state, causing everything from delayed flights to outright cancellations. Initially, my flight was only supposed to be slightly rerouted, so I thought I'd gotten lucky. But 2 hours after landing at a tiny airport, I found myself stuck there, surrounded by strangers, with no clear idea of when or if I'd be able to leave. The waiting was unbearable. I called my parents to explain the situation, but all I heard on the other end of the line was yelling. They called me irresponsible and accused me of not caring about them. Frustrated, I hung up the phone, but in some strange way, I was relieved. If the flight didn't take off, I wouldn't have to spend New Year's Eve in that toxic atmosphere. With nothing better to do, I started watching people around me, hoping to distract myself. That's when I noticed a man standing a few meters away, wearing a backpack slung over one shoulder and staring right at me. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but every time I moved, he moved too. Maybe it was a coincidence, I told myself, trying to rationalize, so I decided to ignore it. That strategy didn't last long. When I got up to use the restroom, I noticed him heading in the same direction out of the corner of my eye. I quickened my pace and entered the restroom, relieved that it was empty, but also unnerved. He wouldn't do anything in a public place like an airport, I told myself. Maybe I was just being paranoid from all the stress. I went into one of the stalls and soon heard him enter the restroom as well. Then I heard stall doors opening one by one. Panic set in. He was clearly looking for me. I scrambled through my backpack, searching for something I could use to defend myself. I thought about yelling, but just as he approached my stall, a group of teenagers came into the restroom. I seized the opportunity, opened the stall door, and there he was, standing just 2 stalls away, staring at me. I immediately looked away and rushed out without even washing my hands, heading back to the crowded seating area near security cameras. By 10 p.m., I got the confirmation. My flight had been officially canceled. I looked around and didn't see the man anywhere. I figured he must have caught another flight or left the airport if his flight had also been canceled. Relief washed over me. The airline offered vouchers for nearby hotels to anyone who needed accommodations. By the time I tried to get mine, though, it was too late. Every room was already booked. The whole situation was chaotic, with people shouting and arguing. I tried to complain, but quickly realized I wasn't great at being assertive in situations like that. Frustrated and unwilling to deal with the commotion at the counter, I decided to pay for a room myself. Not wanting to spend the night at the airport, I searched for a budget-friendly option and found a cheap hostel a few miles away with available beds. I took a shuttle bus and arrived around 11:30 p.m. The place was run down, but it would do for one night. Unfortunately, the only room available had shared bunk beds, which wasn't surprising at that time of year. 3 of the beds were free, so I accepted it. I'd stayed in hostels before, so it wasn't a big deal. When I entered the room, 2 of the beds were already occupied. One man was asleep, and the other was on his phone. I tried to greet the awake one, but either he didn't hear me or just ignored me. I chose one of the empty beds, stashed my things underneath it, and lay down. I was exhausted, but falling asleep wasn't easy. The room smelled musty. There were sounds of snoring, fireworks booming outside, and people celebrating loudly both inside the hostel and out on the street. Eventually, I drifted off, likely from sheer exhaustion. Around 2 a.m., the sound of footsteps in the hallway woke me. Someone entered the room. I opened my eyes just enough to see, but it was too dark to make out much. Then he turned on his phone flashlight, and the glow lit up his face. It was him, the man who had followed me at the airport. My breath quickened, and a chill ran through me. He dropped a backpack by one of the empty beds, sat down, and started taking off his shoes. My mind raced. Had he followed me? Or was this just a bizarre coincidence? Maybe he'd ended up in the same situation as me, stranded with nowhere else to go. The hostel was close to the airport, cheap, and this was the only room with available beds. That reasoning calmed me slightly. I stayed completely still and slowly pulled the blanket over my head, like a child trying to hide from a nightmare. If it was just a coincidence, I didn't want him to notice me. I heard the bed creak as he lay down, and his breathing eventually shift into snores. Once I was sure he was asleep, I made up my mind. I had to leave. I carefully gathered my things, moving as quietly as possible, and slipped out into the hallway. Every moment felt like an eternity. Once outside, I braved the biting cold of the early morning. I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't care. I just wanted to get as far away as possible. Luckily, it was nearly 4 a.m., and I found a bagel shop that opened at 5. I stood outside, trembling and watching every shadow, every passing car. The streets were bustling, but I felt completely alone. I couldn't tell if I was shaking from the cold or the adrenaline. When the shop finally opened, I stepped inside, overwhelmed with relief. Not just because they were open on New Year's Day, but because I wasn't going to freeze to death. I ordered a tea to warm up and sat down, trying to calm my nerves. That morning, I caught a flight home. I never saw the man again. I'll never know what he wanted, or if running into him at the hostel was just a coincidence. Rationally, I think it was, but in the moment, I couldn't think clearly. That feeling of vulnerability is something I'll never forget. I've always hated New Year's. To be honest, I've always disliked life in general. I didn't have the happiest childhood, and as an adult, I turned into a melancholy, solitary person. New Year's was just another day, a day that annoyed me deeply. It felt like everyone suddenly became ridiculous or hypocritical. They'd spend miserable years doing nothing to change their lives, yet every year, they'd fill themselves with hope, pretending the next year would be their best one yet. For me, it was easier to accept life as it was, which made New Year's just another unbearable circus. While everyone else celebrated, exchanged cheerful messages, and watched fireworks, I usually spent the night alone, ignoring the noise outside. This year was going to be no different. I worked late, bought a frozen pizza, and decided to spend the evening watching old movies on the couch, one of the few things that genuinely brought me joy. Around 9 p.m., a notification on my phone caught my attention. It was a message from an unknown number. Happy New Year, Lucas. Ready to play? I blocked the number immediately, assuming it was spam or some kind of scam. I went back to my movie, smirking ironically. But seconds later, another message came through. The number was different, but it was clearly the same person. On the screen, the message appeared. It's rude to block someone, especially on the last day of the year. I'm here. If I were you, I'd look out the window. My heart raced. I stayed frozen on the couch, completely paralyzed. Another message popped up. It's not nice to keep people waiting, especially people you share so much history with. Against all my instincts, I got up slowly and pulled back the curtain. The street was well lit, filled with parked cars and families heading to parties, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Still, the words, people you share so much history with, echoed in my mind. Who could it be? I wasn't sure if I should feel relieved that it was someone I knew or utterly terrified. Another message appeared. No point in looking so scared. If you want to see the new year, you'd better stay rational. Now you've got two options. Option 1, let me in. Option 2, join the game. My heart started pounding louder. If this was a joke, it had already gone way too far. I rushed to lock every door and window in the house, checking each one carefully. Maybe it was just some idiot trying to scare me, but something about the tone of those messages felt deadly serious. And since I'd been bullied before, I knew what some people were capable of. The phone buzzed again. Good choice. Looks like we're playing. Here's proof this is real. This time, the message included a photo. It was me, just minutes earlier, peeking through the window. Who are you? And what do you want? I typed back, even though I knew I probably shouldn't. Someone who likes to end the year with a little fun. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed a knife. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. Another message came through. You've got 10 minutes to find the key, or I'll come in anyway. Before I could respond, I heard something stirring uncomfortably close to the house, coming from the front walkway, or perhaps even the yard. I rushed to the side window and saw a man standing on the sidewalk. He was wearing a black coat and a hood that covered his face. He was holding something, but I couldn't tell what. I recognized his posture. I knew this man, but I couldn't remember who he was. He looked threatening. I tried calling the police, but the signal was down. Even the Wi-Fi, which was usually reliable, was out. The street was full of people, but I was completely isolated. I should have called the police the moment I got the first message. Another sound echoed, closer this time. I ran to my bedroom, locked the door, and shoved a piece of furniture against it. I was convinced this was just a prank, and there was no way anyone would actually break into my house. But the messages kept coming. 8 minutes. 7 minutes. Each one was accompanied by pictures of me, taken through the windows. He'd been watching me the whole time. My brain was racing, trying to find a solution. If the key was hidden inside the house, that meant he'd already been here. Locking myself in the bedroom wasn't going to help. I had to find the key. I searched every room frantically, but I couldn't find anything unusual. Then, a new message appeared. I can't even begin to describe the pleasure it gives me to see you so desperate. I ran to the bathroom, feeling like I was about to throw up. And that's when I saw it. A key inside the sink. How had I not noticed it before? I was sure I'd used the bathroom after getting home from work. I was sure I'd washed my face. Congratulations, Lucas. Now you've got 10 minutes to use the key. That meant he was watching me. But how? The bathroom didn't have any windows. The only explanation was a hidden camera. I went back to searching the house, now looking for something the key might unlock. With only 2 minutes left, I found a locked box in the pantry. I used the key and opened it. Inside was a hunting knife, identical to the one my grandfather used to own. Beneath the knife, was a clown mask. Well done. Now maybe you'll have a shot at seeing next year. I hadn't even finished reading the message when I heard heavy footsteps at the entrance. He was already inside the house. My heart raced. His intention was never to play. He wanted to torment me and make me give up out of fear. Without thinking, I ran to the bathroom, grabbed some alcohol, and poured it in the storage room next to the bathroom. Then I turned on an old radio I had in there, which only played static, and hid in the bathroom. I heard him reach the top of the stairs, walk down the hallway, and head straight toward the noise. My instinct was right. He was stupid. I rushed to slam the door shut, locked it, and used the lighter I always carried in my pocket. The flames spread quickly, but what happened next was worse. He started laughing, a sinister laugh I knew. I didn't stay to watch the fire. I bolted out the front door. It took me 20 minutes to call the police, but by then, I could already hear the fire truck sirens approaching. 2 hours had passed. The upper floor of the house had burned completely, and the lower floor was unrecognizable. I'd told the police everything and was waiting for them to confirm they'd found a body in the house when I got one last message. Congratulations. You bought yourself another year. See you in 365 days. Initially, I thought he had been trapped inside the house, but over time, without any confirmation from the firefighters or the police that a body had been found, a growing certainty took hold of me. He had escaped. I felt a slight sense of relief, but at the same time, an overwhelming terror. Since then, life has taken a few turns, and I've moved to another state. I'm still confident I recognize that posture and that laugh, but I genuinely don't know who it could be. I wake up several times a night, dreaming about the sound of a message notification. But with New Year's approaching, it's gotten worse. I barely sleep. I don't know what's coming. Even with the police aware of everything, I feel unprepared and certain he'll be back.